Good evening, everybody. Huge honor to be here with all of you and have an opportunity to speak with so many of you and to speak tonight. My name is Jason Patent, and I'm the American co-director of the Hopkins Nanjing Center for Chinese and American Studies at Nanjing University. In a sense, my job title says a lot about what I do, American co-director. I have an opposite number who's a Chinese co-director, and we are jointly responsible for delivering the mission of the Hopkins Nanjing Center, which you can look at it in a couple of ways. Our mission, from one perspective, is to deliver highest level of graduate education to some extremely bright students from China and from mostly the United States. Chinese and international students, and most of the internationals are American students. The founding vision of the two presidents who founded the Hopkins Nanjing Center 25 years ago continues to inspire all of us. They envisioned a day, this is President Steve Muller from Johns Hopkins University and President Huang Yaming from Nanjing University. They envisioned a moment when the Secretary of State of the United States and the Chinese Foreign Minister would walk into the room, shake hands, and recognize each other as alumni of the Hopkins Nanjing Center. We're not there yet, but we're making our way. Former Consul General from Shanghai is Ken Jarrett is an alumnus of the center. Chinese Minister of Commerce Chen Deming is an alumnus of the center. The U.S. Ambassador to Vietnam is an alumnus of the center. So we're making progress. So another way to look at our mission is that the Hopkins Nanjing Center is where U.S.-China relations are enacted and lived on a daily basis. Now, that's me. All right. It isn't always pretty. In fact, it's often not pretty how U.S.-China relations are lived at the center. You can see this some contention going on here. This kind of conversation, whether it's at a panel or in a classroom or in a dorm room where Chinese and international students share living space at the center, dozens and dozens of difficult conversations happen every single day at the Hopkins Nanjing Center. If you can imagine for a moment, as an American, maybe your Chinese roommate is looking at you with a straight face and telling you that everything that the Chinese Communist Party has ever done for Tibet has been a good thing. And on the flip side, maybe you're a Chinese student and you have an American telling you that Taiwan isn't a part of China. These kinds of things can lead to very strong emotions and very strong reactions. One thing that I love about the center is that the normal human option of running away doesn't exist. We have to stick around and work it through. And there is tremendous reward to be gained from that. When you sustain that kind of work over time, it bears significant fruit. Is it this one? There we go. You can't see the whole thing, but yes, this was a pomelo peeling race, and not particularly academic in content, but in spirit. I think this picture really captures the spirit of the center when the center is at its absolute best. The reward of doing all of that hard work is this incredible sense of camaraderie, and a sense that there's things that happen at the Hopkins Nanjing Center that don't happen anywhere else in the world. Now, I've been fortunate enough in my life to have chosen a life of intercultural exploration. I look back at my grandparents, who I see as kind of the origin, really, of my path, and they didn't have a choice. My paternal grandfather started his life in Irkutsk in Siberia in the Soviet Union, and my paternal grandmother started her life in Iraq and Baghdad in the waning days of the Ottoman Empire. And through crisis after crisis after crisis in their young lives, they both ended up in Shanghai in the 1930s as stateless Jews. My father spent his first 11 years, from 1939 to 1950, in Shanghai, and they ended up emigrating to the United States in 1950. I was raised in western Montana, but we took a lot of trips to San Francisco to visit family when I was young. And I would always hear about Shanghai. So China was always a natural kind of part of my background. Although you never know it from looking at me, but I have this 2 generations before me. I was also fascinated with language, and we would go to Chinatown, and the whole notion of China seemed so exotic to me. When I got to college, I thought, I've got to try this thing out. So I took the Chinese history course. Modern Chinese history started in 960 AD. I thought, wow, this is something a little bit different. And then I started taking the language, and I was absolutely, completely hooked. And all of this ended up in 1991 with my first trip to China, 20 years ago now, with Princeton in Asia, sending U.S. Americans to China for a really, really long time, and to other countries in Asia. I ended up in the Dongbei, up in Pengyou, Xiqihar. That's where they sent me. We were the first, myself and my roommate were the first emissaries from PIA to go to that part of China. And if you wanted to film how not to do US-China relations video, you could have sent a crew with me and learned a lot. In many ways, I was a stereotype of the sort of arrogant, complaining American. I did some things right, but it would have been a really interesting study. I could have used a lot more preparation. But I learned a lot, and I ended up in 1993, after a year teaching in Guangzhou, I ended up at Stanford University, where I studied, got a master's degree at the Center for East Asian Studies there, and met my future wife, whose name is Colette. Oh, wait, one more back. There we go. So this picture is this part of my story was the summers of 1998, 1999, and 2000. Colette, that's her in the middle, and that's me, you see, and a good friend, Matt Bartels, worked for a company called Where There Be Dragons, and we led 12 American high school students at a time through the wilds of the Tibetan Plateau and other parts of China for 6 weeks at a time. And it was the most intensely exhausting and transformational work that I've ever been a part of in my whole life. Exhausting for us, exhausting for the students, because you could just watch these kids grow before your eyes because their brains are just getting completely rewired by this experience that they're having. Incredibly hard work. And that's one of the points that I keep returning to, and it was interesting to hear Dr. Fitzgerald mention hard work as well. The kind of work I'm talking about here it's actually bodily work, because physiologically, the human organism isn't conditioned to just naturally get along with people who are different from us. Evolution has created mechanisms for us to fear those who are different from us, and we deal with those. That's a part of our inheritance. We can't change that. So it's hard work to overcome those tendencies. When I think about that with regard to the US and China, what often happens, one sort of default way of looking at China and the US is to just say, wow, these are two incommensurable societies, so far apart that we could never really get along. But I think if you just pivot on that idea, twist it just a little bit, a whole different kind of a view emerges, which is, you could say, because China and the US are so vastly different, that we offer each other a tremendous wealth of resources for solving the problems that all human beings face. And then the person who was an enemy can become a friend, the person who was a rival can become a partner. I was having lunch in Beijing with a colleague of mine. He and I sat down with a Chinese alumnus of the Hopkins Nanjing Center back in October. And he was telling us about his company. It's an American company that does mining safety in China. And they partner with a Chinese company. And this Chinese alumnus's opposite number is an American alumnus of the Hopkins Nanjing Center. And they work together. Not surprisingly, they work together very closely. They get things done quickly, and as a result, mines in China are getting safer faster. To me, that's just such a great expression of what's possible when the US and China are getting along well. So I've talked about learning, I've talked about alumni. Obviously, our context here for being together tonight is alumni. So I just want to say a little bit about that. When I think of alumni, I think of two things. I think of magic and I think of mystery. The magic of alumni is when you go from being a participant to being an alumnus of a program, you go from being part of something that seems very finite to being part of something that's really infinite. It's for the rest of your life, you will always be an alumnus of that program, and you will always be able to make contributions back to those who come after you and to continue to make and remake the meaning of what it means to have participated. And mystery, you never know what kind of an alumnus somebody is going to be when they're participating, because transformation happens again and again and again, and you never know when or where it's going to happen. So the thing about alumni networks is they don't form themselves, and they certainly don't sustain themselves. And so kudos to Project Pengyou for swooping in here and taking on this incredibly large, important, and challenging task. Now, I've got more skin in the US-China game than I've let on. Just returning to my personal story, back in 2002 now, my wife and I, Colette and I were in Chengdu, and we had, before leaving San Francisco, to go to Chengdu, we had taken a big fat pile of documents and handed it over to an adoption agency in San Francisco that we'd been working with for months, and we joined the ranks of those waiting to adopt a child from China. In June 2002, our dream came true, and we drove down to Chongqing, and we adopted Maria Xiaofei Plum Patent and became her mom and dad. 2.5 years later, We adopted Francesca Xiaorui Plum Patent, who turns 8 tomorrow. 2 more, so they now, Mariette and Francesca are the 4th generation in my family to represent these really deep bonds between the US and China. So that's 4 more bonds. Then I think of each of us in this room, the bonds that we represent between these 2 countries and all the people whose lives that we touch. Bond after bond, 100,000 strong, 1 million strong, 1 billion strong. Each of us moving one step closer towards a world of peace. Thank you.